PowerPoint loaded, right?
Yes. Well, I don't have do you want me to present for you, or do you want to present?
No, I just need to get, okay, then hold on, let me, okay, when I share, I'll have it. Because, okay, I got it, hold up.
Well, if you need me to, Vivian, I can share it for you. In the participants CTERM folder, they do have the PDF version of your PowerPoint that they can follow along with.
All right, give me a second, you guys. You know, it's early in the morning. I am retired, so you know it takes me a minute to get rolling. Okay, can everybody see it?
Yeah, you got it. You got it.
Yes. Okay, can you be my timer? Will you be my timer?
Yes.
Okay. All right, are we ready? All right, good morning, everybody. Because we're doing the slide, I won't be able to see everybody, but I'll try to be in and out of the rooms as much as I can. And I would like it to be interactive. So we're gonna be talking a little bit about what is culturally responsive teaching. Let me see, can I move this out of the way? Oh, okay, I got it going already. Let me move this. Okay, we're going to talk about what you can do to develop and implement culturally responsive action steps and strategies, because it's about you. Let me hide this. Okay, I really want us to acknowledge the fact that each one of us has to be aware of our own attitudes and our perceptions and behaviors and feelings about diversity, especially when we look at our larger community, our schools, and our society in general. And I know diversity and all of that means different things to different people. So we're going to try to talk a little bit about that. The challenge of cultural change really forces all of us to make a commitment to try to understand and to be aware of our changing demographics and diversity. Because as a community and as a society and as a world, we're more diverse than we've ever been. So I think that's real important that we be aware of what it is and how it impacts us. And it's an ongoing quest for equity, and it requires deliberate and intentional exploration of ourselves and others and what it means to be white or African American or Latin American or Asian or any other cultural group that you may be aware of or a member of. And for teachers, I think it's really important that to be truly effective, you have to practice self-awareness as you work to bridge the connections between your school, your family, and the community. So when you think about culture, what does culture mean to you? Think about what is culture? What does it look like? How did it impact you? Because it means different things to different people. So I'm going to give you my definition and some research definition about culture. It's an integrated pattern of your traditions and your practices and your guides of behavior. It can be part of what you do as a family or as a community or as a school. So each person, each person is a member of multicultures, and each has implications for the educational process. You think about culture as the codes of behavior, your values, your norms, your beliefs, your customs, your communications, or the way you do things. It's in art, music, food, literature, and clothing. They're all visible aspects of culture. Schools have culture, ethnic groups have culture, businesses have culture, neighborhoods have culture, and it's dynamic. It doesn't stay put, it changes over time. And then there's diversity within culture. So when you think about your family's culture, what is your family's culture? What does your family culture look like? What's important to your family when you think about culture? Or do you think about your family as a culture? Think about your food practices, the values and beliefs that you share and pass down to your kids. What kind of art did you have in your house? What are your child rearing practices? Your working schedule? What's your clothing style? What are your beliefs around religion and manners and customs? Your medical care, what do you believe in? Do you believe in the healthcare system? Did you get the coronavirus, or did you have reservations about it? All of those are part of your culture, and it's really important. There's no two people perceive it the same way, even though in your family you may have certain cultural traditions and beliefs, but how you interpret that and how you believe in that may differ from culture, from each family member that you have. So think about that. What does that mean? Culture gives meaning, context, and direction to things. So when you think about culture, what does it look like for you? It is the filter through which people process their experiences and events of their lives. It influences one's values, actions, expectations of themselves. It impacts one's perceptions and expectations of others. It informs our understanding of when support is needed, in whom and how we seek support. So just think about that, and who do we attempt to support or provide support to? Some families' culture belief is what happens in this house stays in this house. And they're very reluctant to seek support from others or to share issues with others because of their cultural socialization. Culture shapes your behavior, your values, institution, and everyone is influenced by norms and expectations that are part of your cultural upbringing. Individuals and organizations are defined by their culture, which reflect their belief systems and their behaviors that are informed by race and ethnicity and other factors such as race and age and sexual orientation and physical ability. So think about your school culture, your individual classroom culture. What factors have framed how you have set up your classrooms, or the practices that your school have, the groups that you have, the mascots of the school name, all those things are part of that school's culture. And schools have been asked to mandate and educate specific demographic groups of students by race, by ethnicity, by sex, by special needs or socioeconomic status. So think about your school. When you break down the population of your school, who's represented? Which cultural groups stand out for you? Which do not? What's the dominant population of your school? Look at your staff. What's the ethnicity of your staff, the age of your staff? All of those are aspects of culture that I think influence and impact how decisions are made, how policies are made, and how the school operates. Culture is central to learning. It plays a role not only in communicating and receiving information, but also shaping the thinking process of groups and of individuals. So I want to take a moment, and I want you all, anyone that's willing to share, to just kind of give me some ideas about your culture. What aspects of your culture stand out? Anybody?
I'll share.
Okay.
Aspects of our culture at our school is that our school works together, students and teachers, staff, and everybody alike as a team. And they build upon all the each other's strengths and needs. And it's really important for our school morale and welfare of everybody.
Okay, good. Anybody else?
Come on,
Okay.
everybody. You guys had that great music. Wake up.
Well, you know, I really would like this to be interactive to some. I don't want it to feel like a lecture because anytime you talk about culturally responsive instruction, culturally responsive practices, and sometimes you can make people uncomfortable because we don't want to talk about culture. Sometimes we think it's all about race, and it's so much more than race. Race is just a factor of it. Because when you look
I'll share.
population,
So Miss Williams, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just thinking, but just think about all the things that are part of our celebrations. Those are cultures. So, and some of that is maybe race specific, but most of it is not. Yes. Somebody want to say something?
Yes.
No. Oh, go ahead.
You got it.
Because we got quite a number of people, I can't see everybody who's talking, so I'm just going to be listening if that's okay with everybody. Okay, go for it. Somebody was trying to say something.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, as far as like with the culture in our school, I don't know if this is part of it or not. Well, I think it is, but our ESL teacher, she is, well, for one thing, she is a German woman, but she every year she's always telling us and giving us ideas about, you know, what to do with the kids, and you know, telling us more about their culture. And then of course I go and research some of their culture, and every year she does this international day where they make posters of their country, and they bring food, and they have, you know, the music and the dance. So I mean, I love that about our school, and she does it every year consistently. So
Yeah.
Can I add something? Our school is a very rich. It's very rich in cultures because we're military. A lot of military transients their children attend our schools. So we have a diverse group of students, and the culture that it brings to our school, the diversity and everything is incredible. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
So when you talk about culture and you talk about race, it's not just culture of race of, you know, what somebody looks like. It's what everybody brings in and adds from their own backgrounds, whether it's in the same region, or, you know, across the world, or, you know, in the same United States, East Coast, West Coast, whatever. It's an amazing culture. Is just amazing, period.
Yeah.
I'd like to add something on a different scale, I think, for my own experience talking about classroom culture and looking at that slide that you had that shows what makes up culture. Family is like probably number one for me. So my classroom knows that this is your room 6 family. And I've got the family tree with all the staff members and parents' names. And I really feel like our school community is a family. And I think that is so important in our interactions with, you know, not only each other, we advocate for each other, we advocate for our students, our communications with parents, we really try to get their input. And I think it's very, I just think it's unique. Hopefully it's not. But that aspect of family and being a team, I heard someone else say, acting as a team is really important. And that's how I feel about our culture.
Great. I think the
like,
challenge. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I said I like what Jennifer said, acting as a team, but also like realizing that each team member brings something unique to the table, and being able to like you said, bounce off of those strengths, and even like bring some of their culture into like the learning experience, you know. So
that's the point that I was going to make. I think it's great, but we got to also make sure that our instructional practices and our textbooks and the resources and things that we use help reflect that. Otherwise, it gets to be one-dimensional. It's like we talk about culture, but we don't demonstrate culture. It's words, but not action. I think it's important that as we're looking and working with our students, we really think that our brains are wired to make those connections. And it's easier for our brains to learn and store information when we have a hook to hang that on. And that hook is the background knowledge that our students bring in that classroom, because our students come from diverse backgrounds. So when they walk in that classroom, that knowledge and that information doesn't stop. And all of a sudden they are blank slates. So I think it's important that we try to build on that. And that helps them scaffold their learning. It helps them to feel more connected. It helps them to feel like they have something to offer and not just be sponges to soak up, but they also have something they can share with others. I think that's crucial.
Vivian, I just wanted to add, I was trying to chime in, but no, I totally agree with everything you just said, because I think sometimes we forget like what, how that piece, that cultural piece, like is important to our students. I think everyone said a lot of great things, because I would like to see, I have only been at my school for a year, so I would really like to see our school be more welcoming to like families, welcoming their diverse cultures, whether it is ethnic or racial, but just even like, just like their daily routines. But yeah, I totally agree. I think it makes a huge difference in the students' experience in the classroom. And I think that's very important. And I think as teachers, and not just teachers, but staff, they can have a better understanding of who our students are, and we can make better connections with them.
I think the challenge sometimes is that recognizing their own ethnicity and their own diversity, because sometimes people are not comfortable talking about it there again, because they think when you're talking about ethnicity and when you're talking about diversity and you're just talking about race, and that makes people uncomfortable. But the irony is, it is what it is. It's part of it, but it's not the only part of it. So I think you got to walk your talk, and look, if you break your own family's background down into cultural pieces, then that makes it easy to see other families, your students as cultural ambassadors, for lack of a better term. And that they have so much to share, and there's so much you can learn from those families, and that enriches your classroom, it enriches your school, and enriches the learning for students, which is what it's supposed to be about. So when you look at this culture tree, what do you see? I am darn and trying to get this doggone thing down so I can, it doesn't get in the way, but that's easier said than done. I want to move it without moving my slides. That doesn't work. So let's just keep it going. Okay, we're talking about the levels of culture. There's surface culture, shallow culture, and deep culture. When you think about surface culture is that stuff that has low emotional impact. We can talk about dance and stories and literature and drama and games and songs and holidays and talking styles and cooking. Those are the things that we see. Those are the things we may engage in. Those are the things that we tend to be comfortable with. But boy, when we start moving down to shallow culture, the unspoken rules, that has a high emotional impact on our trust, our concepts of our time, our acceptable food sources, our personal space, our eye contact, a lack of eye contact, our ways of handling emotion, the tempo of our work, our nonverbal and communication habits, our child-rearing practices, being honest, nature of relationships, theories of wellness or disease. And boy, we can see that has a lot of emotional impact right now on this debate that we've had around the COVID vaccine, to vaccine or not, to vaccinate or not to vaccinate, and all that, and wearing the mask. All of those things have a high emotional impact on trust, and you wouldn't think that there would be some unspoken rule around some of those things, but they are. And we can see all of that going on around us. And then we get to the deep culture. Those are unconscious beliefs and norms, and they have intense emotional impact on our trust, our concept of self, our decision-making, our worldview, our notions of fairness, our preferences for completion versus cooperation, our relationship to nature and to animals, our spirituality, and our concept of a higher power. All of those things are deep culture, but they have a significant emotional impact in terms of how we perceive the world. So when we think about the culture tree, the tree is a bigger part of an ecosystem that it shapes and impacts its growth and development. So the shallow culture, as I mentioned earlier, is represented by the trunk and the branches of the tree, which we can think of as surface culture. They're observable, like observable fruit that the tree bears, like the apple. You see the tree, but the fruit is the apple. Okay, then the shallow and the surface and the shallow culture are not static. So they change and they shift over time. As groups move and ethnic groups intermarry, and there's a cultural, not hodgepodge, but a mosaic or a tapestry. And just as branches and fruit on the tree change in response to the seasons and its environment, those interconnections with the cultural groups that merge and intermarry creates that tapestry. And then you look at the deep culture. The deep culture is the root system of the tree. It's in the ground, and it's hidden to some extent, and it nourishes its individual health. It nourishes the health of the whole tree, and it is the bedrock of self-concept, of group identity, and how we problem solve and how we make decisions. But you got to understand, there again, it's in the ground. You don't really see it, but it has a major impact on the rest of the tree and the rest of how that tree functions and grows and develops. So think about how culture as that tree, or, I used to use the iceberg. So either one of those images gives you an idea of the surface. The surface is what we see, but the other parts of it are just as important and just as critical to how culture impacts our lives and shapes our lives. Culture exists at a number of levels that we talked about. Levels of authenticity or realness, from surface forms of culture to shallow level, and finally the deep culture. All parties here have asked to assess and express themselves, particularly beneath the culture surface down to the deep cultural levels. So how do you express yourselves from the part that we see to the part that we don't see? And these cultural elements are noted in it that we see now too. It's important that you think about this in terms of your students. How do you unpack some of those cultural dynamics, and how do you assess it? How do you reflect upon it? How do you internalize it and think about it in terms of how it impacts your students, how it impacts you? So you just want to think about it as you try to look at culturally responsive teaching strategies and resources. So I want us to look at the dimensions of culture, which goes, I guess it's really in line with the tree. All of these things overlap and interconnect. So when you're thinking about the 4 dimensions of culture, the core dimension is how we think and communicate, okay? And that's impacted by all those variables that you see. The core dimension is impacted by our thinking style, that's impacted by ethnicity and physical ability and gender and all those other things. The internal dimensions are largely out of our control, but they have a powerful impact on behaviors and attitudes. Your age, your sexual orientation, your nationality or ethnicity, your physical ability or your disability, all those dimensions. Then you have your external dimensions, and those are larger within our control and are our choices, and they're formed by the environment. The profession that you have, your parental status, your social status, your marital status, your economic status, your faith, your spirituality, your education, your appearance and dress, your geographic location. All these things are impacted by the choices and the decisions that you make. So you have some control. You have a lot of control over those, actually. And then you look at the organization dynamics. They are largely defined and influenced by the group or the organization in which we work. Because in all honesty, the schools that you work in, a lot of their policies, practices, and procedures, I'm not sure you have a lot of impact on those policies, practices, and procedures. I'm sure you'd like to have more impact, but a lot of those things are how that school's operationalized, how the principal or the school divisions has set certain policies and practices in place, and those impact you and sometimes impact you significantly to the point that you may have to go to a different location because you don't agree with those organizational dynamics in terms of that location. So look at how the dimensions of culture are around us all the time and it impact every aspect of our life. So the center of the wheel represents the internal dimensions that are usually most permanent or visible. The outside of the wheel represents dimensions that are acquired and change over the course of your lifetime. And so it's the combination of all these dimensions that influence our values, your beliefs, your behavior, your experience, and your expectations. And they make all these characteristics that make us unique. So think about your students and how all these characteristics impact them, as well as these characteristics and how they impact you. So when you think about the individual culture dynamics, look at these dynamics and think about who are you? How did your dimensions of diversity influence your actions, your behavior, your values, your experiences, your belief system? Think about your age. Think about your race, your ethnicity, your gender, your disabilities and abilities, your sexual identity, your economic class, your religion, and how those things are part of your personality, how they impact them. And I'll talk very candidly about the one on age. I'm 69 years old, and I am amazed at how I can look back in 2021 and some of the things that I experienced in 2021. I remember some of those experiences from high school, some of the dynamics that we're talking about, race and culture and stuff, high school and integrating my high school. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how long ago? I graduated in 1970, from high school. And yet we're talking about some of those same kinds of variables about schools being more segregated in the 21st and 2021 in some areas than they were 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So when I look at the economic class and how things have changed, I'm retired now, getting Social Security, getting my retirement from Virginia Retirement Association, those different kinds of variables. 15 years ago, that was not the case. So I was in a very different place. So you can see that those variables don't change, but your experiences through time change based on those kinds of things like this. So who are you? When you think about your experiences and your values and your beliefs, who are you? Is there anyone that'd like to share a little bit about how any of these things have impacted how they perceive themselves in terms of their identifying individual cultural? Anybody?
I don't mind sharing.
Okay.
So income, economic status, religious beliefs, and geographic location definitely play a huge impact in who I am, my upbringing. And they also allow me, and education, of course, they also allow me to be able to relate to the kids in the classroom for the demographic area in which I work. And just my upbringing alone, especially the economic status, allows me to relate better to my students in the classroom because they're being brought up the same way. And so I'm able to meet some of their needs and be able to understand maybe why they're not performing that day, whether it's because they didn't eat or mom is missing in the home. And so I definitely believe being culturally aware of who they are and then having that same identity or, being brought up in that area allows me to influence them, and it influences me.
Yeah, Tasha, thank you for sharing. I appreciate that.
I'd like to share as well. I know one of the things I noticed was you talk about age. I'm 50 and I worked with a lot of younger teachers. And I noticed that when I, with my students, the way I dealt with them, it was different from how the younger teachers dealt with them, because they were the things that they found aggravating, I didn't. Because I've mellowed at my age, and I've grown. I have two grown children, and I've seen the way children behave, and so those the little things that they would do that I could overlook or I could deal with easier. And also I'm working on a doctorate, so I have higher education. I also have a disability, and also with my ethnicity, I am from Jamaica, and I worked in a school with a lot of children who were from South America. All those things gave me the ability to be a lot more tolerant, to understand where these children were coming from and deal with them differently from a lot of my peers who were white and didn't have that background. So yes, I understand.
I think it's important that all of us understand that when you walk into your classroom, you take these cultural, individual characteristics with you. You don't check your age at the door. You don't check your religion at the door. You don't check your race at the door, ethnicity, sexual identity. You don't check any of that, because all those are components of your personality. So your kids don't either. So, you know, you can't walk in the door and all of a sudden just be non-culturally affiliated, because they're part of who you are. You can't just leave it at the door. So it's important that you embrace it. You don't push it down anybody's throat, but you wear it anyway. So you might need to find a way to connect with it so it can help you be enriched by your students. My experiences, growing up in Southampton County and helping to integrate our high school, that's significant in terms of who I am and how I have viewed the world through those lenses, because that's real. So I can be empathetic to students, but that impacted every aspect of my life, from the colleges I attended to the advanced degree, all those kinds of things. So just think about how all of these things impact your students and your families.
Vivian, can I just add that I think it's, I appreciate, something like this because, my personal background, let's see, my parents are from the Philippines. I grew up here. And, my family is multicultural. My husband's African-American. And so of course our children are half and half. So from a personal standpoint, if I can just say, not just as a teacher, but as a parent, it's so important. My children appreciate me as a parent. I appreciate it when my kids can see representation of who they are. Because it's a breath of fresh air. I can't tell you how difficult it was for me to just, grow up without, people that look like me, or just, people of color. And, it is a touchy subject because I work with so many, I'm one of the only people of color in my school building. So it is very important. And I guess like sometimes I appreciate, when someone can understand and empathize, like how difficult it is to have to work in a community where you're kind of singled out, but it's important because there's been countless times where students have come up to me and asked me, "Are you Filipino? Wow, that's great." And then I show pictures of my family, and my students are like, "Oh, your husband's African American. Oh, that's cool," and I know that might sound, kind of silly, but it's so important to these kids, to see that and, to just hear that. And I don't have a problem sharing my information about my family to my students, because I want them to see those types of figures. My husband is big on cooking. So like, I want my students to see that, hey, men cook in the kitchen, and I think it's important.
I think the kids are very good at acknowledging and celebrating that stuff. And I think us as adults are a little bit less because of sometimes we think there are repercussions of just being who we are. But I mean, Our country is a salad bowl. We are not a melting pot. A melting pot is when everything blends in into one. We're not a melting pot. I know Daniel Monahan came about that in the 70s, and I understand where he was coming from. But think about a melting pot. A melting pot, everything blends in into one. And you don't see the diversity and the uniqueness of everything that went in the pot. That's why I think I always describe culture and stuff as a salad bowl or as a tapestry, where you can see the distinctness is integrated, but you still can see the tomato. You still know that there's a tomato in there instead of just being one blob of a melting pot. So think about that, because your students really see the salad bowl and they enjoy the salad bowl. So why can't we celebrate the salad bowl? I think right now, everything has gotten to be so political that we've lost some of that comfortableness, acknowledging the differences. The differences made this country what it is. Otherwise, we'd look like every other country, and we don't. So I think we need to find a way to help our kids feel okay. And it's okay to be who you are. You can't hide it anyway. So even though, sometimes they'd like to put you under what's the word? I know a glass top. You can't hide who you are. And I think that's why it's important for our students to feel comfortable, and we need to help them celebrate it. I got to get going, you guys. I got a lot of information to share, and my time will be gone in a minute. So let's keep going.
I'm loving it. You're awesome.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, dimensions of diversity. A dimension refers to the properties and the characteristics that constitute the whole person. And note that there are primary and secondary dimensions of diversity. So when we think of our primary dimensions, those are the dimensions that are unchangeable, inborn differences that influence early socialization, and they have an ongoing impact throughout one's life. Age, ethnicity, your physical abilities and qualities, your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, all of those are important aspects of who we are. And that's fundamental to how the world perceived us. And then there's secondary dimensions: educational background, income, military experience, religious experience, geographic location, marital status, work experience. And then when you think about young people, they have some different secondary experiences. The educational background, but family income, volunteer work or club experience, parental status, geographic location, family configuration. So we think about all of those things, and the religious beliefs. All of those things are part of a secondary dimension for our young folks, especially when you think about middle school and the high school area, because they're volunteering and work experience. All of those things help them be connected. So secondary dimension for adults are those that can be acquired or discarded or modified throughout our life. The amount of influence carried by these dimensions varies from person to person and from situation to situation. So one size doesn't fit all. It's important that we understand that. And it is so important to identify which culture is most salient for us. Think about it. This can change during our lifetime, even from day to day. If we recognize the culture that we most identify with, it helps us to gauge our response or interactions with those whose culture are different than our own. For example, my race is African American. It may or may not be one of my cultures that I most identify with, yet it is part of who I am. And I identify as a African American senior citizen. Okay, because that's part of who I am right now. But another culture thing is an educator, social worker, marriage counselor. All those other pieces are part of my cultural identity as well. So all of us are not just one piece of one dimension. There's so many pieces that make us who we are. Now we're going to hit on culturally responsive teaching. Culturally responsive pedagogy is student-centered approach to teaching. Think about that, because you're looking at your students' unique cultural strengths and that are identified and nurtured to promote their achievement and their sense of well-being about the students, about their cultural place in the world. So that's why it's so important to think about culturally responsive teaching. You're looking at the students, and our students are so diverse and more exposed in ways than they've ever been exposed to, which requires you to stretch so that you can have them be prepared for the 21st century and beyond. Gay defines cultural responsive teaching as using the cultural knowledge, the prior experience, and the performance styles of diverse students to make learning more appropriate and effective for them. It teaches to and through the strength of these students. So that's why it's so critical, because you're looking at student strengths. Okay, so keep that in mind. Let's see, can I get this out the way? I cannot find the best place for this thing, guys. Sorry about that. So we want to, what are the strengths of these students? That's what we're looking at. Cultural responsive teachings involve connecting academics to students' daily lives, to their cultural backgrounds and concerns in ways that support their engagement, achievement, and empowerment. And cultural responsivity is a developmental process. It's the ability to learn from and relate respectfully now to people of your own culture as well as those from other cultures. It includes adjusting your own and your organization's behavior based on what you learn. Think about it. As you learn more information, you respond differently. You respond more appropriately. You embrace it. You know, if you don't know what you don't know, then you're apt to make more mistakes or be insensitive. And part of that is just you just don't have an awareness. So when you look at the brain, because it's really important to think about the brain responses to this, cultural responsive teaches and leverages the brain's memory system and information processing structures. Because it's important to acknowledge that many of our diverse students come from oral cultural backgrounds. Their primary ways of knowledge transfer is through oral and active. You know, that's why music is so critical to certain cultures, because it's oral and it's active. It's a common cultural tradition that cuts across racial groups. African American students learn like that, Latino students, Southeast Asian and Pacific Island communities all have strong oral cultures. So think about this when you're students. Each of these cultural groups uses the brain's memory system for turning inner information into usable knowledge. These memory strategies are used to make learning sticky, like connecting what needs to be remembered to a rhyme or music. That's why we still know the ABC song, or by reciting it in the poems or riddle or limerick. Some of you may be old enough to remember Conjunction Function, that TV show, because it really helps students remember stuff because of the music. That's why you think Sesame Street is so successful, because it does use a lot of oral traditions and images and repetition to help students remember stuff. The other thing, it doesn't hurt that it's colorful in background and, you know, all those different kinds of animals, things that they use as well. So when you think about cultural responsive teaching in the brain, cultural responsive instruction is being aware of the bias that affects student-teacher relationships. Okay, common cultural tools for learning like music, repetition, metaphor, recitation, physical manipulation of content, ritual uses the brain's memory system. That's why the rap was so popular for students, because of the repetition, the music, the beat, all of those variables really help students catch it. And boy, you know, when you put those things to educational material in terms of those contexts, students know it. And you look at these kids, like, how do they remember this stuff? Well, because it's oral, it's repetitive, it's got a rhythm to it that they can follow. Neuroscience reveals the connection between emotional trust and learning. Cultural responsive teachers understand the concept of communalism that is common in communities of color, building trusted relationships with students who are marginalized. You know, if you don't have that trusted relationship, it does impact how students learn. So culture and the brain connection, I really want us to think about this. And this is by, her name is Zaretta Hammond, and she's done a lot of current research about culture and the brain. And among its many function. The brain is wired to enable social behavior. So you're going to adapt to new social groupings and patterns. Some of this wiring is the result of the co-evolution of the culture and the brain. So think about how your students learn, the brain and tapping into their learning synapses and their attention and all those. Cultural practice adapt to neural constraints, and the brain adapts to cultural practice. So you want to understand how culture, which is comprised, again, we talked about behaviors, values, symbols, meaning systems, communication systems, rules, and conventions, how it is shaped, and it shapes the mind and the brain of individuals in that culture. So other circuits are wired as a result of learning, particularly implicit learning. So our circuits are wired. Think about that, how we learn. So when we think about the brain, our brain actively absorbs the irregularities in our cultural environments. The representations that are created in the brain in turn influence how we interact with, and they shape our own environment. So it's a connected relationship. Culture impacts the way the brain is wired and activated, but the brain is malleable. The brain can be reshaped. Our changed experiences over time can then reshape those brain activations. So one time, something that you learned that you thought was not important, as your brain absorbs it, your brain reacts differently, and the brain is like, aha, it is something important, even though you thought it wasn't important at the time. The brain absorbs it and responds to it differently. In this sense, the brain can be seen as a cultural sponge of sorts, absorbing the irregularities of our surrounding physical and social environments. It internalizes the structural regularities of the environment within the parameters of innate and development and constraints. So think about the brain again. And culture affects both what and how we see our surroundings. So our students and every individual person is impacted by our culture. Now, how you define culture, that may be more individual, but it's all surrounds us, and it means different things to different people. But think about the culture of your family. What holidays do you celebrate? Who's included in those celebrations? What's important to you? Those of you that can do your family tree and go back to Europe, you can go back to the potato family if you're Irish, and that's why the Irish came over here. And why did or if your ancestry is German, and the Holocaust may mean something entirely different to your family if your heritage is German. So those variables are real important, and they impact how you view the world even in 2021. So when you think about the culturally responsive brain rules, I want you to think about these. The brain seeks to minimize social threats and maximize opportunities to connect with others in the community. Positive relationships keep our safety threat detection mode in check. Culture guides how we process information. Attention drives learning. All new information must be coupled with existing funds of knowledge in order to be learned. So when you're trying to think about your students and trying to give them new information, if you don't connect it to something that they know and they have experienced it or learned or at least heard about, it's not going to make sense to them, and therefore they're not going to learn it because it is not connected. So if your textbooks and your resources that you use in your classroom are not connected somehow to what our students bring into their classroom, they are not going to learn that material to the extent that they need to function and to grow. It may go in, but it is not being absorbed and processed and used by the brain to help them grow. The brain physically grows through challenging and stretching, expanding its ability to do more complex thinking. So you got to think about that. What are you doing? The existing fund of knowledge got to be tapped into somehow. So when you think about culturally responsive practices, these are things I want you to start thinking about. Culturally responsive practices are specific educational practices, instructional strategies, team processes, and curricular content which have been established by research to increase the achievement of culturally and linguistically diverse students. It's aligned with research on effective instructional practice. We are culturally responsive when we adjust how we teach to the needs and experiences of our students. It doesn't mean throwing out what you already know, but it just means that you're going to adapt it and you're going to find a way that you connect with with what our students know, and you're going to think about it being. You're going to bring, I guess, you bring the world into the classroom, so to speak. And it's going to where our students are culturally and linguistically for the purpose of bringing them to where they need to be academically. So think about it. You're going to utilize the cultural knowledge, the life experiences, and the learning styles of culturally and linguistically diverse students to make learning more relevant and effective for them. You're going to validate who the students are, and you're going to set high expectations for behavior and learning. You don't neglect the major aspect of a student's identity, and you want to foster an environment where differences are accepted and understood, particularly if those differences are that have been historically ignored or disparaged. So think about who your students are. Recognize that this is going to look different from school building to school building because of your diversity of your students and the diversity of the staff or the lack of. I think I have to acknowledge that this is going to be a lot more challenging for the students whose schools don't see diversity as being important. Well, I treat all of my students the same. Really? If you do, then that's the first area of concern, because you're dismissing the diversity that those students represent. You want your students to feel accepted, and if you teach them all the same, they don't need the same thing. Think about the fact, let's say you are one of 5 kids, or you're the parent of 5 kids. I'm going to ask you a question. Do you treat all 5 of your kids the same way? Do your parents treat all your siblings the same? I doubt it, because you all need these different things. I'm the oldest of 7 kids. I know my mom treats me differently. I was her firstborn versus my sibling that's now, I have a younger sister that's 19 years different. So there's 19 years age difference between myself and my youngest sibling. So of course my parents did not treat us the same, because they were not the same people. They had grown and experienced so many different things from the time that my mom was 17 until she was like 36, 37 years old. She's not the same person. No one is. So your students are not the same. So male, female, young, tall, with a disability, they're different. So I think you have to look at them for the uniqueness and then try to educate them in that same context. The benefits of culturally responsive practices is that it raises the expectations for all students. And you're going to move away from your deficit mindset, and you're going to identify your students' assets, and you're going to use them to create rigorous student-centered instruction. That's important. It helps the schools better meet the students' need. I think it's important to understand that a lot of your underserved students may face implicit bias because of their race, culture, or language. Implicit bias, please understand that it's your unconscious attitude or stereotypes that you may hold. And it's implicit because you may not even be aware that you hold it. And as a result of these, a lot of our students, sometimes our students are often underrepresented in special education, and their needs may go undetected. Think about the students that are being referred for special education. Think about your students that are being referred for disciplinary issues and behavior challenges. Think about the students that you don't call on. Think about your students who are absent frequently, or who are there in body but not there in mind. Think about the student that plucks your last nerve and you wonder what in the world is going on with this student. That's when you might really would need to adapt your practice. What are you doing? in terms of your instructional strategies. It builds on the culture that the students, I can't see this. It builds on cultural competence. Sorry about that. Oh, sorry, this is popping up. Okay, an inclusive curriculum helps students understand cultural differences, different perspectives, and you're going to appreciate other strengths and you're going to build empathy. Okay, that's what's so important. It helps your teacher reflect on your own identity and your experiences and how they impact your attitude and your teaching practices. It helps students feel valued and empowered. When students see themselves represented in the curriculum, they feel like they belong. They're more likely to develop the trust that it takes to build a relationship with a teacher. Think about it. A sense of belonging makes learning easier and it builds students' self-confidence. So think about these things that we're talking about here, okay? So some of the characteristics of culture response in teaching. Let me take a sip here. Positive perspectives on parents and families, communication of high expectation, learning within the context of culture, student-centered instruction, culturally mediated instruction, reshaping the curriculum, enhanced liberal education. You create an interactive and personalized learning environment. You create a diverse stage for students to collaborate and to share knowledge, and the teacher as a facilitator. So you're facilitating learning. So I want you to think about these. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on these because there's some other things that I really, the last 30 minutes of our time is going to be on these, the next few items that are coming up. So when you look at the cultural proficiency continuum, think about yourself and think about the school, your school. Where's your school? The cultural proficiency continuum is a conceptual framework for assessing your personal and organizational progress, and it provides a common language for describing both healthy and counterproductive or dysfunctional events, policy, practices, and individual behaviors. So I'm just going to jump right to it because I think if you see it, it helps you understand it better. So here's the continuum of the cultural competence continuum. You're going to start from cultural destructiveness and you're going to work your way towards cultural proficiency. And as you see it, cultural destructiveness is a force of simulation. And you don't even want to acknowledge there's differences. And then as you look at cultural incapacity, is racism and it's maintained stereotypes. Cultural blindness is that differences are ignored. There you go, you treat everyone the same. Cultural pre-competence is exploring cultural issues and you're committed to assessing the needs of the organization and individuals. Then cultural competence is recognizing and the individual and cultural differences and really seeking to understand, seeking advice. And then you have the cultural proficiencies when you walk, you talk. That's when you're really looking at your policies, your practices, and your procedures, and you have addressed it and you're working on it and you're doing something all the time to learn and to grow. So, and you see the difference in code. You stomp on it and you stomp it out for cultural destructiveness, cultural incapacity. You see the difference and you make it wrong. Cultural blindness, you see the difference and you act as if you don't. Cultural pre-competence, you see the difference, but you respond inadequately. But that's progress because at least you see the difference and you're trying to respond. Cultural competence, you see the difference, you understand the difference that difference made, and you're trying to interact in ways that make a difference. And then cultural proficiency, you see the difference and you respond. You honor the differences among the groups. You view diversity as a benefit and you find ways to acknowledge and to respect the differences among the cultural groups, particularly as they relate to your student body. So think about these things in terms of your particular building. Most schools have a common mission, a mission statement, or a list of values that is framed and posted conspicuously for visitors. But a culture proficient school community makes the time to translate those values into the behavior norms for all members of the community. So culturally proficient administrators ask the question, who are we who we say we are? Do the data reflect our values? Do I view my students through a deficit lens? And who is included in decision making? Those are really critical questions that your administrators need to ask if you're going to be talking about a culturally responsive school setting and culturally responsive teaching. So ready for vigor, rigor framework. You're looking at awareness, learning, partnerships, information process, and communities of learning. For the sake of time, I want to go past this because I really want to get to the reflective guide. So I'm going to move ahead. You have this in your stuff, so I just want us to think about it. Our cultural framework, our cultural vantage point is an observant advantages in observing mind has a specific point of view, and that point of view has physical, psychological, and cultural dimension that restricts how much we can be observed, how much can be observed at any moment. So you can only take in so much in your cultural vantage point. So just know that. Okay, I gotta move ahead because I really want to get to this piece. Okay, this is the part that I really want us to spend most of our time, the remaining time on, a reflective guide for cultural responsive teaching. There are many frameworks and ways to think about cultural responsive teaching. And cultural responsive teaching must be incorporated at every stage of the learning process, from curricular development to assessment. Cultural responsive teaching is not a secondary or supplemental approach to education. It is providing it's every learning opportunity and school activity that's going to take into account the ancestral and contemporary cultures, beliefs, and traditions of the students that you have. This can include observing your students' significant holiday traditions in class, or seeking to understand how and why your students and their families view what they view, certain particular subjects more than others. So there's 8 core competencies that we're going to hit on real quick, but I'm going to leave these with you because I think this is where your work began. This is really instructive. Okay, there's 8 of them, and we're not, because of time, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to spend a lot of time on it, but these are food for thought. So you don't have to spend a whole lot of time on it here, but it's what you do afterward that's going to make the difference. Number 1, reflect on one's cultural lenses. Number 2, recognize and redress bias in the system. Number 3, draw on your students' culture to shape curriculum and instruction. Number 4, bring real-world issues into the classroom. Number 5, model high expectations for all students. Number 6, promote respect for student differences. Number 7, collaborate with families and local community. And number 8, communicate in linguistically and culturally responsive ways. So that's it. But this is where the work begins. Because when you look at reflective question number 1, culture competency number 1, reflect on one's cultural lenses. Each one of these competencies has 5 areas that have been highlighted that you as a teacher have to think about and reflect on as you prepare for your students and as you teach your students. So I'm just going ahead but before I go to that, I just want to, are there any comments? I know I've thrown a lot at you and it's an hour and a half, so, and I've been doing this for a while, so I've condensed this quite a bit. But are there any feedback or comments before we move on? Because I'm going to be sailing through these and I'm sorry, but I don't know any other way to do it. Any questions, comments, feedback?
Yes, I was just going to say, wait, let me turn this off. Wait. The presentation was awesome. I had a student this year when you spoke about culture. She didn't really speak much. With the mask, I really couldn't see her face, but the last day of school, she gave me this big hug, and then we used like Canvas, and like one night about 11 o'clock, I got this email from her, through the school, and it said, Miss Kelly, I have to stay home for 3 months. I don't know how I'm gonna survive. I really love you and I'm gonna miss you. I had no idea that I had reached her because she wasn't a talker, but obviously I made an impact in her life and I didn't even realize it. It was just heartfelt, and I received it. I reached out to her mom. That's a student that I will forever, be connected with, to check on her, to make sure that, she's okay. Because the students are watching you. They are looking up to you. Whether they tell you or not, we are making a difference and we are making an impact.
Yeah, that's important. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Any others before we move on? Okay. So when you think about these questions, competency, well, I'm just going to highlight a couple on each one of the competencies, not all of them. You guys have this information. But the first one, when did I become aware of my membership in various identity groups assigned by race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, and gender? So think about that. And number two, how has my life experiences and membership in various identity groups influence my beliefs and actions? Those are critical. And I want to throw number three out. How does my identity differ from my students and colleagues? How does it shape my interaction with students, families, and colleagues? Those are critical. How have I used or been the victim of stereotypes and microaggressions? Do I have the skills to respond to stereotypes and microaggressions if I encounter them? And then number five, what are my short-term and long-term goals for developing this competency? What resources will I need to accomplish these goals? That's a lot of stuff packed into those 5 statements. So think about eat it then, and what's the comment? How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So just look at these one bite at a time. But I think number 3 on this particular one is particularly significant. How do you differ from your students, and how does it shape your interactions with your students, your families, and your colleagues? Those are critical questions. Number 2, recognize and redress bias in the system. Now, looking at this reflection, do I understand the difference between the bias at the personal level and bias at the institutional or systemic level? This is real critical to your students. Do I disaggregate and analyze data by student subgroups, those assigned by race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, ability, sexual orientation, and gender, to uncover potential disparities? I do think it's real critical as you as teachers that you really know your data story for your school building, because it says a whole lot about your building. And inadvertently, if you're part of that staff, it may say a whole lot about you. So think about the data story. How does your classroom, school, and district reinforce barriers that reproduce disparities in student outcomes? There you go again. Ask those questions. Which students face surveillance, policing, and higher disciplinary consequences? What are resources, people, time, and money allocated? Where are they allocated, rather? What part do I play in the status quo? Am I an enabler or disruptive of the policies, practices, and norms that disadvantage certain students? Critical. And then, what are your goals, short-term and long goals, for dealing with this competency? Food for thought, that's what these questions are. Okay, competency 3, drawing your students' culture to shape curriculum and instruction. Do the assignments, assessments, and instruction resources I use allow my students to see themselves and see others? Do I review the assignments, assessment, and instruction resources I use for historical accuracy, stereotypes, cultural relevance, and multiple perspectives? Good question. Do you? How do I seek to learn about my students' existing knowledge, cultural backgrounds, interests, issues of concern, and family traditions? Do I incorporate students' background knowledge, cultures, and family traditions daily, or only on particular holidays or units like Black History Month? Because right now we're in Pride Month, but schools are out for the most part. So, maybe that wasn't an issue. And there again, your short-term and long-term goals for addressing it. Okay, Competency number 4, bring real world issues into the classroom. Right now, that may be a loaded item because there's so much controversy right now about racial issues and stuff that, even critical race theory. And critical race theory is a law school level stuff. So we're not even talking about that, okay? So please understand what's being said before you react. How can the content I teach, whatever that is, help students solve problems in their lives, their communities, and in the world? How do the assignments, projects, and assessment I use empower and prepare students to solve problems in their lives, their communities, and the world? How do the assignments, projects, and assessments I use connect content area knowledge to students' daily lives, including experiences with racism and injustice? Because your students are seeing it every single day. And some of them are being directly impacted by it. Do the assignments, projects, and assessments I use develop my students' self-efficacy, civic responsibility, and motivation to challenge the status quo? And there again, the last one is your short-term and long-term goals to address this competency. Competency number 5, y'all. Do you model high expectations for all students? Because that's what competency number 5 is. How do I communicate that I have high expectations for all students, for students of all backgrounds, even those who have struggled, historically struggled? Because sometimes our students know you don't expect much for them. That's why they don't give you much. Well, he's from a disadvantaged family. Yeah, really? Okay, so what does that mean? You don't expect anything from them? How do I help students develop high expectations for themselves? How do I ensure no students disengage from learning? Do you check your students when they hit the door? Because if you greet them when they hit the door and you can actually face them and know their names, you can have an idea whether or not they're going to disengage that day or not, based on how they respond to you in that morning. What supports and scaffolds do I provide to ensure that all students are able to meet the rigorous outcome goals? And there again, your short-term and long-term goals for developing this competency. Went back. Competency number 6, promote respect for student differences. How do I create learning environments that are safe, respectful, and inclusive for students of all identity groups? So, our students one size don't fit all. How do I help students develop empathy, respect, and understanding for people who are both similar and different from them? How do I role model proactive responses to all forms of bias? For example, racist speech. Some of these things are really tough, but yet they're important. How do I help students recognize their responsibility to stand up against all forms of bias incidents in their everyday lives? Some of this is microaggressions, the ones that get sent to the student, to the principal's office every day. And sometimes they're not doing anything different. They're just not the student that they don't respond the way you think they should respond. So is it the student or is it you? Number 7, collaborate with families in the local community. Which families are most involved in my classroom and school? Whose voices are typically heard, valued, and acknowledged? How do I reduce participation barriers for families and community members? How do I involve families from various backgrounds in developing classroom and school activities, practices, and policies? How do you? Now, this is a tough one. Do I consider myself a member of the community in which my students live? Do I regularly visit churches, local stores, or other community spaces? A lot of us live no place near where our students attend and know very little about their communities and would be fearful even going to their churches and local stores just because of maybe your stereotypes or your misperceptions or it's like, I don't have time for that. I'm with them 5 days a week. When I'm off, I do not want to be bothered. So I don't know. Think about that. Do you respond? I can't even see that, hold up. Communicate in ways that are responsive to them culturally and linguistically. So think about that. What is my style of communication verbally and non-verbally? Does my style of communication differ from that of my students and their families? I mean, do you code switch? Do you even know what it is? Because your students are doing it. How do my behavior and communication expectations of students and family take into account varying cultural norms? How do I actively work to reduce communication barriers between myself and students and their families? How do I offer communication in multiple languages? Do I use translators, not students, to improve my communication with families? And please don't use the students because you put them in such an awkward power dynamic position with their families. Find somebody. There may be somebody in the building, call the hotline or whatever, but do not use the students because it's just really bad practice to do that. Okay, so those are the 8 competencies, and I know I flew through them, but I want to ask you a couple of other things and then try to close out with I'm going through this. I want to go check your filters, your programming, because I think these are the things that kind of help us and hurt us at the same time. For your filters for information, I can't talk, sorry about that. Do you use the New York Times, ABC News, books and magazines? What books and what magazines? CNN, Stereotypes, MSNBC, Fox News, Word of Mouth, the Richmond Times-Dispatch, Family, Facebook, Twitter, Friends, Associate Blogs, Historical Records, Legacy. What do you use? What are your communication? And where do you gather your knowledge? Because those things are real critical. I'm going to go back to this slide and then we're going to be almost done because I lack a couple of minutes for responses. I think when you think about the application of these practices, just know that students need to understand that there's more than one way to interpret a statement, event, or action. By being allowed to learn in different ways or to share viewpoints and perspectives in a given situation based on their own cultural and social experience, students become active participants in their learning. Hollins believes that culturally mediated instruction provides the best learning conditions for all students. It may help decrease the number of incidents of unacceptable behavior from students who are frustrated with instruction not meeting their needs. And also students from cultural groups who are experiencing academic success will be less inclined to form stereotypes about students from other cultures. In the 8 minutes that I left, there's some other stuff here, but I really would like some feedback as we begin to close out. Feedback, comments, questions. I know I threw a lot at you, but you have the information as a PDF, my contact information at the end. I'd be more than happy to have an ongoing conversation or discussion with any of you or with your individual schools if that's something that you'd be interested in. But feedback, comments, reactions.
I think this is great, Vivian. And I just wanted to say, I like the last part you have here from Hollins. And it says that it may help decrease the number of incidences of unacceptable behavior from students who are frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like, my first year teaching 5th grade, I feel like I had success in helping the class that I had that year have a mutual respect for one another. Because I walked in and there were just there were a lot of varying issues and problems. And it wasn't, and I wanted to share this because it wasn't just about it wasn't a race issue. It wasn't so much an ethnic issue. It was more about different personalities in the classroom.
Excuse me, who's talking?
Oh, I'm sorry, Rose.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So they just have, different personalities, some were into anime, other students were more about basketball. And so we had, just a lot of different students who had very different interests, different quirks, different attitudes. Yeah. And they had a hard time getting along.
Yeah.
you know, my co-teacher and I, we made it a point to, just really teach that mutual respect for one another. Someone mentioned morning meetings, and I implemented that, and that was very helpful. And my thing was like, you don't have to like each other, but you do have to respect one another in the classroom. And it was just a point of like, getting the students to understand, you got everybody's different. You don't have to like what they like, but just leave each other alone, or just respect that, and know that there are there are different things out there. And I feel like it brought more peace and success in the classroom. I wish I had worked more with them because it was the year of COVID when when I got that class and stuff. But I think having that cultural responsiveness, utilizing and applying these tools is very important. It makes a huge difference. Not just culturally or racially, but just your students' personalities and where they come from.
Rose, I agree with you. I think everybody, as you guys think about going into the 21-22 school year, I really think it's important that when you're first going into your classroom, that you think about how to connect them as a group and how you build that classroom as a family so they can recognize the uniqueness of their classroom, but be supportive of each other and embrace each other in spite of, or maybe even because of their differences. And that just doesn't happen organically. I think you have to make that happen, and you make them care about each other. And when they care about each other, then the rest of it will take care of itself. And then they can practice that for anybody else and be more supportive of each other learning styles and learning differences. Any other feedback and comment in our last 5 minutes?
I have a quick comment. This is, hopefully I'm not interrupting. This is Johnny. And I've noticed over the years, first of all, I really enjoy this. And anytime I can get that cultural diversity, I love it. But I've over the years been teaching about 16 years now, and that some teachers are just afraid to touch stuff like this. But I would advise, and something that I found in my building, working in small groups, that diversity groups, is to write down the things that you're scared of, or that are not comfortable for you. And then go into, it's for schools that don't have a diversity impact committee, to write those and find somebody in the building that you feel comfortable with so that you can grow in it. Because once you get past all of those things that you are held back from, the world is yours, especially a classroom. Kids are so much more respectful.
I think that's why the first thing that we talked about was just unpacking your own cultural stuff. I think if you acknowledge that you are a cultural being, and what does that cultural being look like for you, I think it makes a lot more practical relevance for you. For example, if you happen to be a white American, think about your cultural framework, who are your ancestors, and look at that and embrace that. And then when you come to terms with that, it's like, I never perceived myself from that perspective. Then you understand what other folks are going back. What are traditions that were, that you inherited from your ancestors that, it might be your name. It might be your food preferences. That's culture. If you embrace that, then you can understand and more align with where your students are coming from, because we're not dismissing your culture to celebrate ours. It's not one and done. Why can't we just be interconnected? We can celebrate people's food. We can really embrace other cultures' music, their language, their clothing, but we don't want to embrace the individual from those individual cultural groups. So takes practice. Other feedback?
I think food is like the best way to help students connect. I think the funniest thing that my students Rose.
Okay. All right, Rose.
This is one of my passionate things, like cultural diversity and cultural responsiveness. I love this.
Okay.
one thing that my students talked about a lot, because I was big on mac and cheese, because my husband, he makes mac and cheese from, it's his grandfather's recipe. So like I always talk about it. And my students would always talk about how Walmart, they're the Walmart that's in our neighborhood, how they have oh gosh, it was like spicy mac and cheese, or it had like jalapenos in it, and they would all just like bust. And if anyone had any challenging times during virtual learning, the thing that got our students talking was food.
Oh yeah.
Food was like the thing that brought like all of us, brought the conversations going.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I did want to add too, like I really like I appreciate what Johnny said too, and I think ask your peers, ask like if you feel comfortable, like talk to them, because I have so many stories where I've had to, I'm working on the sidelines. I've worked as a teacher assistant. I've worked at different types of schools, and the things I see behind closed doors that teachers say about their students, whether it's culturally, racially, or based on their students' personalities, it's hurtful. It really is. And like, I think we have to ask these questions that Vivian has been asking us throughout this presentation, because we have to, we reflect on it, because our students do know. They really know how, like, they really know how they feel, how we feel about them. And so I think,
well, we show it. We show it, and sometimes we don't realize that we're not as invisible as we think we are. Our body language shows it. Our tone of voice shows it. Yeah, we show it.
Absolutely.
All right, Kristen, I think my time is up. I'm so sorry, you guys. I wish I'd had half a day, but I got an hour and a half.
Well, thank you so much, Vivian. It was just so nice